In 2014, Elizabeth Holmes was worth $4.5 billion on paper. She was 30 years old. She had dropped out of Stanford at 19 to start a company that she said would change medicine forever. She wore a black turtleneck every single day, deliberately, consciously, as a statement. She had lowered her natural voice by an octave to sound more authoritative. She had studied Steve Jobs so obsessively that she hired the same designers he used, adopted the same management philosophy he preached, and structured her company around the same culture of secrecy he had perfected at Apple. The media called her the next Steve Jobs. She called herself that too, in private notes that would later be leaked to journalists. Forbes put her on its cover. Fortune put her on its cover. Time magazine named her one of the 100 most influential people in the world. President Obama appointed her a United States ambassador for global entrepreneurship. The board of her company included 2 former U.S. Secretaries of State, 2 former U.S. Secretaries of Defense, and a former U.S. Senator. George Shultz was on the board. Henry Kissinger was on the board. James Mattis, who would later become Secretary of Defense under President Trump, was on the board. Walgreens had signed a partnership deal to offer her company's tests in pharmacies across America. The United States military believed her technology was being used to test soldiers' blood in medevac helicopters on active deployment. Investors had poured $700 million into her company based on her promise that she had built a machine that could run hundreds of medical tests from a single drop of blood. Technology that would democratize healthcare, eliminate needles, and make early disease detection available to everyone on Earth. Her company was called Theranos. It was valued at $9 billion, and the machine did not work. Not slightly, not partially. Not in a way that needed more time and development to fix. The Edison machine, the device at the center of everything Holmes had promised, the technology that justified the $9 billion valuation, the product that Walgreens was offering to real patients in real pharmacies, did not work. The tests it was running were so unreliable that patients were receiving false medical results. People were being told they might have cancer when they didn't. People were being told they were healthy when they weren't. And Elizabeth Holmes knew. This is the story of the most audacious fraud in Silicon Valley history. Not a story of a company that tried and failed. A story of a company that was built from day one on a lie. And the specific decisions, the specific psychology, and the specific culture of Silicon Valley that allowed that lie to survive for over a decade before the truth finally arrived. The story begins in 2003 when a 19-year-old Elizabeth Holmes walked away from Stanford University's chemical engineering program and used her tuition money to start a company. She had one idea, a patch that could automatically detect infections in soldiers on the battlefield and transmit the results to doctors remotely. The idea did not work. The technology was not feasible. But Holmes did not close the company. She pivoted, and the pivot became the lie. The new idea was a blood testing device, a machine small enough to sit on a countertop that could take a single drop of blood from a finger prick, no needle, no syringe, no vial, and run hundreds of diagnostic tests simultaneously. Cholesterol, vitamin levels, cancer markers, infectious diseases, all from a pinprick. The results would be faster, cheaper, and more accessible than anything the existing medical laboratory industry could offer. It was a genuinely compelling vision. The blood testing industry was dominated by large, slow, expensive laboratory companies. A machine that could do what Holmes described would genuinely change medicine. The problem was that no such machine existed, and the fundamental science behind some of her claims was, according to experts who later reviewed the technology, close to impossible with the methods Theranos was using. Holmes knew this, or she chose not to know it, which in the eyes of the law and in the judgment of the jury that would eventually convict her, amounts to the same thing. What she chose to do instead was to build a story so compelling, surround it with credentials so impressive, and protect it with a culture of secrecy so total that nobody with the power to expose the lie ever got close enough to see it clearly. The secrecy was the first weapon. Theranos operated in what Holmes called stealth mode for nearly a decade. Employees were forbidden from discussing their work with anyone outside the company, including family members. Departments within Theranos were forbidden from communicating with each other. The engineering team building the device did not know what the chemistry team was discovering about its limitations. The sales team did not know what the laboratory team was hiding about the accuracy of the results. Compartmentalization so complete that the lie was distributed across the organization in pieces small enough that almost nobody had the full picture. The board was the second weapon. Holmes did not recruit technology investors or medical scientists to her board. She recruited statesmen, former secretaries of state, former secretaries of defense, retired generals, people whose names conveyed authority and whose presence signaled legitimacy, but who lacked the scientific background to question the technology. When investors or potential partners looked at Theranos' board of directors and saw Henry Kissinger and George Shultz, they did not ask to see the data. They assumed that people of that stature would not have lent their names to something fraudulent. That assumption was precisely what Holmes was counting on. The persona was the third weapon. Holmes had studied how Steve Jobs made people believe in things that did not yet exist. Jobs had a reality distortion field, a documented tendency to convince engineers and investors and journalists that things which were impossible were actually inevitable. Holmes built her own version. The black turtleneck was part of it. The lowered voice was part of it. The intense, unblinking eye contact that people who met her described as simultaneously compelling and unsettling was part of it. She gave interviews that were masterclasses in saying almost nothing with absolute conviction. She spoke about changing the world, about her personal mission, about the patients whose lives her technology would save. She almost never spoke in specific technical terms about how the machine actually worked. Nobody noticed, or nobody who noticed had the platform to make the question matter. Before I continue, if you are new to Behind the Tech, please like this video, subscribe, and tell us in the comments, which company do you think is making the same mistakes as Theranos right now? We cover the real stories behind the world's biggest corporate collapses every single week. Now back to the story. In 2013, Theranos launched its testing services in Walgreens pharmacies. Real people came in, real fingers were pricked, real drops of blood were collected, and real results were sent back. Results generated not by the Edison machine Holmes had promised, but by conventional blood testing equipment from other manufacturers, run in a way that Holmes' own scientists had flagged as producing unreliable results when applied to the tiny blood volumes Theranos was using. Patients received incorrect results. A cancer patient was told her cancer markers had returned when they had not. A pregnant woman received alarming test results that were later revealed to be wrong. Doctors made treatment decisions based on Theranos data that Theranos itself knew was unreliable. This was not a financial fraud that happened in boardrooms and harmed only wealthy investors. This was a medical fraud that happened in pharmacies and harmed ordinary people who trusted that a technology cleared for public use had been tested and proven. Holmes' response to internal concerns about accuracy was consistent and documented in the testimony that would eventually convict her. She dismissed the concerns. She pressured the scientists raising them. She accused employees who questioned the technology's reliability of disloyalty. She used the same culture of secrecy that had protected the company from external scrutiny to suppress internal dissent. The compartmentalization that stopped investors from seeing the full picture also stopped scientists from comparing notes and realizing how widespread the problems were. The end came not from a regulator or a whistleblower or a board member finally asking the right question. It came from a journalist. John Carreyrou at the Wall Street Journal had been tipped off by a source. He spent months investigating, interviewing former employees who risked legal action from Theranos' aggressive legal team to speak to him, building a picture of the technology from the fragments that each isolated employee could provide. In October 2015, the Wall Street Journal published his investigation. Theranos' blood tests were wildly inaccurate. The Edison machine could not do what Holmes had promised. The company was running most of its tests on conventional equipment while hiding that fact from investors and patients. Holmes' response was extraordinary. She went on television. She called the story inaccurate and misleading. She appeared on stage at a medical conference days after the article published and was greeted with a standing ovation from an audience that was not yet ready to believe the story was true. For a brief moment, it seemed possible that she might survive the investigation through sheer force of persona. She did not survive it. Regulators from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services inspected Theranos' laboratory in 2015 and found conditions so deficient that in 2016 they revoked Theranos' laboratory certification, banned Holmes from operating a laboratory for 2 years, and proposed sanctions so severe that they threatened the company's existence. The Department of Justice opened a criminal investigation. The SEC charged Holmes and her partner Sunny Balwani with raising more than $700 million from investors through an elaborate years-long fraud. In June 2018, Holmes was indicted on 9 counts of wire fraud and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. In January 2022, a jury found her guilty on 4 counts. In November 2022, she was sentenced to 11 years and 3 months in federal prison. The company that had been valued at $9 billion was worth nothing. The machine that was going to democratize healthcare did not work. The $700 million that investors had put in was gone. And the patients who had received incorrect results from Theranos' laboratories were left with the specific, personal consequences of trusting a technology that was never real. Here is the lesson that Theranos actually teaches you, and it goes deeper than fraud. Elizabeth Holmes did not succeed for 12 years because she was uniquely evil. She succeeded because she understood something true about the culture of Silicon Valley and the psychology of investment that made her lie almost impossible to challenge from the inside. Silicon Valley rewards vision over proof. The entire venture capital model is built on the premise that the future cannot be proven in advance. It can only be imagined, funded, and built. Jobs had built products that did not exist before he built them. Bezos had built a company that lost money for years before it dominated the world. The lesson that Silicon Valley took from those stories was that the people who demand proof before they believe are the people who miss the next Apple and the next Amazon. Holmes weaponized that lesson. She built a story so aligned with what Silicon Valley wanted to believe, that a young visionary dropout could change medicine the way Jobs had changed technology, that asking for proof felt like missing the point. The people who asked for proof were dismissed as people who didn't get it. The people who didn't get it were not invited to invest. Right now, there are companies raising money, building valuations, and attracting the kind of board members and media coverage that Theranos attracted, based on technology that has not been independently verified, in industries where the complexity of the science makes independent verification difficult, surrounded by cultures of secrecy that treat internal questions as disloyalty. Some of those companies are building real things. Some of them are not. The question worth asking about any technology company that keeps its science secret, surrounds itself with impressive names rather than impressive data, and dismisses scrutiny as a failure of vision, is the question that almost nobody asked about Theranos for 12 years. Does the machine actually work? Click here to watch Toys R Us hired Amazon to save it. Amazon used them to destroy it. Because what Elizabeth Holmes did to her investors and what Amazon did to Toys R Us follow the same psychological pattern. A company or a person who understood exactly what their target wanted to believe, told them that story with complete conviction, and collected the money before the truth arrived. Different industry, different crime, identical playbook. I'll see you there.